For 36 years, I thought they were just scars. I was wrong. The X-ray film trembled between my fingers under the fluorescent lights of Billings General Hospital. 3 metallic fragments glowed white against the gray silhouette of my father's ribcage foreign bodies that had no business being there. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils as monitors beeped their monotonous rhythm down the corridor. "Mr. Carter," the radiologist's voice cut through my shock. "Did you know about these?" I couldn't answer. My father had carried metal inside his body for decades, and nobody knew, not me, not until the surgeon's scalpel touched something that shouldn't exist beneath human skin. The boy thought it was just keloid tissue, raised scars from ranch work, barbed wire accidents, the rough life of Montana cattle country. But when they opened him up, we learned the truth. Some wounds don't heal because they were never meant to. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. James William Carter was born in 1948 in Billings, Montana, where the wind carried the smell of cattle and sagebrush across endless plains. He was a rancher's son who learned to ride before he could read, who could mend a fence line with nothing but barbed wire and determination. By 17, his hands were already calloused from work, his shoulders broad from throwing hay bales, his eyes accustomed to scanning horizons for weather and trouble. In 1968, when the draft notice arrived, he didn't run. He enlisted in the Army, became a helicopter pilot, and shipped out to Vietnam before his 21st birthday. He told his parents it was duty. He told himself it was destiny. Sarah Ann Bennett met him at a field hospital in Da Nang in 1969. She was a nurse from Vermont, 20 years old, with practical hands and eyes that had already seen too much death. James came in with malaria, delirious and calling for his mother. Sarah sat with him through the fever, wiping his forehead with cool cloths, speaking softly about the green mountains of home until his temperature broke. When he recovered, he asked her to a USO dance. She said yes, but only if he promised not to die. He promised. They were married 6 months after he returned stateside, in a small church ceremony with his Purple Heart tucked away in a drawer, never to be displayed. By 1976, I was born their only child. I grew up in a house where silence was currency and stoicism was virtue. My father worked as a ranch hand, fixing machinery with the same quiet competence he'd shown in the cockpit. He coached my Little League team, attended every school function, paid the mortgage on time. He was there, always there, a solid presence in the doorway, a steady hand on my shoulder. But he was also absent, not physically, but in every other way that mattered. He never spoke about Vietnam, never displayed his medals, never attended veterans' gatherings or watched war movies. When helicopters flew overhead, he'd go rigid for just a moment, a tell so subtle I didn't recognize it as terror until I was grown. My mother understood him in ways I couldn't. Every month, like clockwork, she would sit him down in the kitchen under the yellow lamp and tend to his back. I thought she was treating keloid scars, the kind that grow thick and raised over old injuries. I thought it was routine. I never asked what she was really doing. I never thought to look closer. September 15th, 2024. The morning started like every other morning in 52 years of marriage. My father poured coffee into the same chipped mug he'd used since 1972, white ceramic with a faded Ford logo. My mother stood at the stove making cornbread, the kind with real buttermilk that came out golden and crumbling. The radio played low on the counter, AM 1340, the veteran station. Always the veteran station, and Sam Cooke's voice drifted through the kitchen singing, "You Send Me." It was 6:47 in the morning. I know, because my mother checked the clock twice when she recounted it to me later, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when everything changed. The coffee cup didn't fall. That's what she told me. It didn't slip from his hands in a sudden loss of grip. His fingers simply forgot how to hold. They opened slowly, deliberately, as if following some instruction from a brain that had stopped sending the right signals. The cup dropped, shattered on the yellow linoleum floor, and black coffee spread across the tiles like ink bleeding through paper. My father stood there, staring at his right hand as though it belonged to someone else. His face went slack on one side. His mouth tried to form words, but produced only a soft, confused sound. My mother knew immediately. 20 years as an army nurse had taught her to recognize a stroke the way a farmer recognizes coming rain. She caught him as he collapsed, easing him down so his head wouldn't crack against the cabinet. She checked his pupils with her thumb, felt for his pulse with practiced fingers, and reached for the wall phone with her free hand. "This is Sarah Carter, 4725 Rimrock Road. My husband is having a stroke, right-sided weakness, facial drooping, speech impairment. We need an ambulance now." Her voice was steady. It was always steady. But later, when she sat across from me in the hospital waiting room with her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of bad coffee, those hands shook. While they waited for the paramedics, my father spoke. Just once. His words came out slurred and thick, like his tongue had forgotten its shape. But my mother understood them. "The letter," he said, "in my wallet." She told him to save his strength. She told him the ambulance was coming. She told him everything would be fine. He gripped her wrist with his left hand, the one that still worked, and repeated it with more urgency. "The letter. Sarah. He needs to know." Then his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. I was in Chicago when my phone rang at 8:47 Mountain Time, 10:47 my time. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring my own coffee, about to start another day of analyzing systems and solving problems that didn't matter. My mother's voice came through the speaker, calm and factual, the way she delivered all difficult news. "Daniel, it's your father. He's had a stroke. You need to come home." No preamble, no softening, just the truth, clean and direct. I asked how bad. She said they didn't know yet. I asked if I should wait to hear more. She said no. I asked if he was going to die. She didn't answer that question. I was on the road within an hour. Chicago to Billings is 545 miles of interstate. A drive I'd made dozens of times over the years, always reluctantly, always feeling like I was returning to a place I'd never fully left. This time I made it in 9 hours, stopping only twice for gas, eating nothing, my mind cycling through memories I didn't know I'd stored. My father teaching me to bait a hook, my father at my high school graduation, standing in the back, leaving before the reception. My father's hand on my shoulder the day I left for college, a single squeeze, no words, and then he'd walked away. My father at my wedding, dancing stiffly with my mother, avoiding eye contact with everyone. My father at my divorce hearing, sitting in the gallery though I'd told him he didn't need to come. Present, but absent, There, but not there. I'd spent 48 years trying to understand him, and failing. Billings Clinic Emergency Department was chaos controlled by procedure. Nurses moved with purpose. Monitors beeped. Overhead intercoms called codes and doctors. I found my mother in the ICU waiting room, still wearing the flour-dusted apron she'd had on when my father collapsed. She stood when she saw me, and for just a moment, her composure cracked. I hugged her, and she let me, but only for 3 seconds before she pulled back and smoothed her apron. "They've done a CT scan," she said. "Ischemic stroke, blood clot near the brainstem. They're prepping him for surgery, but there's a complication." She handed me a large manila envelope. Inside were X-ray films, the old-fashioned kind, the kind you hold up to light to read. I pulled one out and walked to the window where afternoon sun streamed through. That's when I saw them. 3 bright white spots against the gray shadows of ribs and spine. Foreign objects. Metal. They glowed like small stars in the constellation of my father's skeleton. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Shrapnel," my mother said quietly. "From Vietnam, from 1970. The world tilted. I gripped the X-ray film harder, my fingerprints smudging the edges. Shrapnel. The word felt foreign in my mouth when I tried to repeat it, like a language I'd never learned. "He's carried metal in his body for 54 years. My voice came out hollow. My mother nodded. She gestured for me to sit, but I couldn't. I stood there, holding the film up to the light, staring at those 3 bright fragments, trying to reconcile them with the man I thought I knew. "The doctors need complete medical history before they can operate," she said. "The metal is close to the surgical site. They need to know exactly what they're dealing with. Why didn't anyone remove it? Why leave it in for half a century?" They tried. In 1970 at the field hospital in Da Nang, they removed 42 pieces. These 3 were too deep, too close to nerves and spine. The surgeon said the risk of paralysis outweighed the danger of leaving them, so they left them. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, worn leather with pages yellowed at the edges. "I've documented their movement for 54 years. Every month. I measured. Every month. I photographed. Every month. I watched them migrate slowly through his tissue." She opened the notebook. Page after page of dates, measurements. Polaroid photographs taped carefully to lined paper. I saw my father's back in dozens of images spanning decades, young skin, then aging skin, then old skin. The scars changed, darkened, thickened. But in every photo, my mother's handwriting documented the same 3 locations, tracking millimeter shifts like a cartographer mapping continents. "The keloid scars," I said slowly. "Those monthly sessions in the kitchen, you weren't just treating scar tissue. Keloids formed around the foreign bodies, the body's way of trying to wall them off. But keloids grow. Daniel, they can become painful, restrict movement. I managed them, kept them from getting worse. Your father refused further surgery. He said—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. He said the pain was his to carry, before I could ask what that meant. A woman walked into the waiting room. She was in her mid-30s, wearing surgical scrubs, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that were unmistakably my father's gray-blue, sharp, carrying that same quality of looking through you rather than at you. My daughter, Rebecca. I hadn't seen her in 8 years. Not since she'd walked out of a family dinner after a fight with my father that ended with both of them saying things they couldn't take back. She'd stopped returning my calls after that, changed her number, moved to Seattle, built a life that deliberately excluded the rest of us. "Grandma called me," she said to me, not as a greeting, just as a statement of fact. Her voice was cool, professional. I was already in Montana for a conference. I came as soon as I heard, "Rebecca." I started. "Where is he?" she asked my mother. "Surgical prep. They're waiting on us." My mother stood, suddenly looking every one of her 74 years. "They need family consent for the procedure because of the complications." "What complications?" Rebecca's doctor voice took over. Crisp and demanding, my mother handed her the X-ray films. Rebecca held them up, and I watched her face shift from professional assessment to something harder to read, recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Jesus," Rebecca whispered. "The case study." "What case study?" I asked. Rebecca looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Regret, maybe, or shame. 5 years ago, I asked Grandpa to let me interview him for my research. I was writing about intergenerational trauma in combat veterans, about how untreated PTSD affects families across generations. She turned back to the X-rays. "He told me to get out of his house. Said I wanted to make a career out of his pain. We haven't spoken since." The waiting room felt smaller suddenly. 3 generations of Carters, standing in a triangle of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding. "He was protecting you," my mother said softly. "Both of you. Your father believed that silence was love, that if he didn't speak about the war, you wouldn't have to carry it." "But we carried it anyway," Rebecca said. "We carried his silence. We carried not knowing why he flinched at helicopters, why he never slept more than 4 hours, why he checked the locks 3 times every night." She looked at me. "You felt it too, didn't you, Dad? That distance, like loving a ghost." I nodded. I couldn't speak. The truth of it was too heavy. A doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Family of James Carter." We all turned. "We're ready to begin, but I need to explain the risks. The stroke itself is operable, but these metallic foreign bodies complicate everything. They're near major blood vessels. If we're not careful during the procedure, if one shifts..." He paused. "He could hemorrhage, or we could cause nerve damage that leaves him paralyzed from the neck down." "What are his chances without surgery?" Rebecca asked. "The clot will kill him within 72 hours, maybe less. And with surgery, 70% survival rate. But of those who survive, 30% have significant deficits. We won't know until he wakes up." My mother signed the consent forms without hesitation, her signature as steady as her hands when she'd caught my father falling that morning. But I noticed how she gripped the pen, knuckles white. "There's one more thing," my mother said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled envelope, the paper soft with age and handling. "He told me this morning, before he lost consciousness. He said Daniel needs to know. He said there's someone who needs to be called." She handed me the envelope. The address was written in my father's careful block letters, Red Cloud Family, P.O., Box 447, Shiprock, NM 874 Chosoi. A stamp from 1970 was still affixed to the corner, never postmarked, never mailed. Inside the envelope was a letter, written on yellowed paper, folded and refolded so many times the creases had begun to tear. And beneath the letter, a photograph. 2 men in combat fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of a Huey helicopter. One was my father, impossibly young, face not yet hardened by decades of silence. The other was a Native American man, early 20s, with a wide smile and confident eyes. Written on the back of the photograph in fading ink, James Carter and Tommy Red Cloud, Da Nang, March 14, 1970. I turned the photograph over and looked at that smile, at my father's arm around this stranger's shoulders, at the easy camaraderie that I'd never seen in any photograph of my father since. "Who is Tommy Red Cloud?" I asked. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "The man your father couldn't save." I unfolded the letter with hands that wouldn't stay steady. The paper was thin, fragile. The ink faded to brown in places. My father's handwriting. Younger, somehow. Less controlled than the careful printing I knew from birthday cards and grocery lists. "Dear Red Cloud family," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you want to hear from me." My mother sat down heavily in one of the waiting room chairs. Rebecca moved closer, reading over my shoulder. "Your son Tommy saved my life on March 15, 1970. He put me on that helicopter when there was only room for one more wounded. He said, 'You got a girl waiting.' I don't." They found him 2 hours later. The NVA executed him for helping us. I watched from the chopper. I did nothing. The words blurred. I blinked, kept reading. "I'm sorry. I've lived 54 years he should have lived. I married Sarah. We had Daniel. I fixed tractors, coached Little League, paid my taxes. I did everything right except tell the truth. Tommy Red Cloud should be alive. I should be dead. I don't know how to make it right. James Carter." The silence in the waiting room stretched thin and taut. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. A nurse's shoes squeaked on linoleum. The ordinary sounds of a hospital saving and losing lives. "He's carried this for 54 years, Rebecca said finally. Her clinical mask had cracked completely. "This is why he wouldn't talk. Not because he didn't care. Because he cared too much." I looked at my mother. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, that same composure she always wore. But her eyes were wet. "When did you find out?" I asked her. 1971, right after you were born. I found the letter in his toolbox when I was looking for a screwdriver. He was standing in your nursery, holding you, crying. I'd never seen him cry before. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Tommy should be holding his son, not me." She took a shaky breath. I asked him why he never mailed the letter. He said he didn't deserve forgiveness. He said he didn't even deserve to ask for it. "But it wasn't his fault," Rebecca said. "He was wounded. He couldn't—" Logic doesn't matter to guilt. My mother interrupted gently. Your grandfather has spent 54 years believing he stole a life that wasn't his to take. Every morning he woke up was a morning Tommy didn't. Every Christmas, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, he believed he was living on borrowed time. I stared at the photograph again. My father's young face, Tommy Red Cloud's confident smile. One day, before everything changed. There's a phone number, my mother said, written on the back of the envelope. I tried calling it once, years ago, but it was disconnected. But maybe someone in Shiprock would know. Maybe Tommy's family is still there. I turned the envelope over. Faded pencil marks 505-368-4729. I'll try, I said. Rebecca pulled out her phone. I'll search for Red Cloud, Shiprock, New Mexico. Maybe there's a listing. While she typed, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Carter, your husband is in pre-op. He's asking for you. My mother stood. Is he coherent? In and out, but he's agitated. He keeps trying to say something. We followed her down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Through a window, I saw my father on a gurney, an IV line in his arm, a young anesthesiologist checking monitors. His eyes were closed, but his left hand moved restlessly against the sheet, picking at the fabric. My mother went in. Rebecca and I stood at the window and watched. My father's eyes opened when he heard the door. He saw my mother, and his whole body relaxed, just slightly. She took his hand, leaned close. His lips moved. She nodded, stroked his forehead, said something we couldn't hear through the glass. Then she turned and gestured for us to come in. The pre-op bay was small and cold. Medical equipment crowded every surface. My father looked diminished on the gurney, smaller than I'd ever seen him. The strong hands that had taught me to throw a baseball were slack now. One curled uselessly against his chest. "Dad," I said, and his eyes found mine. He tried to speak. The words came out slurred, half-formed, but I understood them anyway. "Did she tell you about Tommy Red Cloud?" "Yes." Something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe, or terror. Both. "I'm sorry," he managed. Each word cost him effort. "Should've told you. Why didn't you?" The question came out harder than I meant it to. He looked at the ceiling, gathering strength or courage. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Ashamed." Rebecca moved to the other side of the gurney. She took his right hand, the one that wouldn't grip back, and held it anyway. "Grandpa," she said, and her voice carried the weight of 8 years of silence between them. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I pushed. I'm sorry I made it about my work instead of about you." His eyes filled. A single tear tracked down his temple into his hair. "Becca," he whispered. "My girl. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The anesthesiologist stepped forward. "I'm sorry, but we need to begin." My mother kissed my father's forehead. "I love you, Jim. For 52 years, I've loved you." Come back to me." He nodded, or tried to. His eyes moved to me. "The letter," he said. "Send it. Promise. I promise. Tell him. Tell Marcus. His dad was brave." "Marcus?" I asked. "Tommy's boy. He was 2 years old. Tell him." Then the anesthesiologist pressed something into the IV line, and my father's eyes closed. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The surgical team began their preparations, moving around him with practiced efficiency. We filed out of the pre-op bay and back to the waiting room. Rebecca immediately returned to her phone. "I found something," she said. "There's a Marcus Red Cloud listed in Shiprock, age 67. It has to be him." She showed me the screen, a phone number, an address, a photograph from what looked like a tribal website, an older Native American man with silver braids, wearing a denim shirt and a serious expression. "Call him," my mother said. I took the phone. My thumb hovered over the number. "What do I even say hello? Your father died saving my father 54 years ago, and we're just now getting around to mentioning it." "You say the truth," Rebecca said. "You say what Grandpa couldn't." I stepped out into the hallway where the reception was better. I pressed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A man's voice answered, deep and measured. "This is Marcus." "Mr. Red Cloud," I said, and my voice cracked. "My name is Daniel Carter. My father is James Carter. I found a letter in his wallet. It's addressed to your family. It's about your father, Tommy." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "James Carter, the helicopter pilot. You know him. My father wrote about him, in every letter home, for 50 years. We've wondered what happened to him, whether he made it, whether he remembered." My throat tightened. He remembered. He never forgot. "Then why are you calling now?" "Because he's dying," I said. "And I think he needs to hear what you just told me." Another long pause. Then Marcus said, "Tell me where you are. I'm coming." The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in plastic chairs that made my back ache. 4 hours of terrible coffee and Rebecca pacing the length of the waiting room like a caged animal. 4 hours of my mother sitting perfectly still, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. Marcus Red Cloud called back within 30 minutes of our first conversation. He was at the Albuquerque airport. He said he'd gotten the first flight he could find to Billings. He'd be there by 7 that evening. My father kept a journal, Marcus had told me before hanging up. Every day in Vietnam, he wrote, "I have all of them. Your father needs to know what my dad wrote about him." Now it was 5 in the afternoon. The autumn sun slanted through the waiting room windows at a sharp angle, turning everything gold. Rebecca had finally stopped pacing and sat beside me, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. "When I was in medical school," she said suddenly, "I did a rotation at the VA hospital in Seattle. There was this old Marine, maybe 80 years old, who came in every week for wound care. He had shrapnel in his leg from Korea. They'd left it in for 60 years because removing it was more dangerous than leaving it alone." She paused, picking at a loose thread on her scrubs. One day I asked him why he never wore his medals. He looked at me like I'd asked the stupidest question in the world. He said, "The medals are for the people who didn't come home. I just borrowed their luck for 70 years. Rebecca's voice cracked. That's when I understood. That's when I wanted to study survivor's guilt. Not to exploit it. Not to make a career out of pain. But to understand why the ones who lived punished themselves for surviving." "You should tell him that," I said. "When he wakes up, if he wakes up," my mother spoke without looking at us. "He'll wake up. He's stubborn. Always has been." A door opened. The surgeon emerged, still in his scrubs, surgical cap pushed back on his head. His face was impossible to read neither good news nor bad news, just exhausted neutrality. We all stood. "The stroke surgery was successful," he said. "We removed the clot, but there was a complication." My chest tightened. What kind of complication? One of the shrapnel fragments shifted during the procedure. It punctured the pericardium, the sac around the heart. He started bleeding into the chest cavity. We had to do emergency repair work. "Is he alive?" Rebecca demanded. "He's alive, but he's in critical condition. The next 24 hours will tell us whether he'll recover. He's in the ICU now. You can see him, but he's not conscious." We followed the surgeon through a maze of corridors to the intensive care unit. The ICU was a circular space, with glass-walled rooms radiating from a central nurse's station. In room 7, my father lay connected to more machines than I could count. A ventilator breathed for him, the rhythmic hiss and sigh of air moving in and out. IV lines ran into both arms. Monitors displayed numbers and waveforms I didn't understand. His face was slack, emptied out. The man who'd taught me to change a tire, who'd sat through my school plays without complaint, who'd shaken my hand at my wedding and said, "Be good to her," that man was somewhere far away, unreachable. My mother moved to his bedside like a sleepwalker. She took his hand, the one not immobilized by IV lines, and held it between both of hers. "I'm here, Jim," she said softly. "Right here. You come back when you're ready. I'll wait." Rebecca checked the monitors with professional efficiency, but her hands trembled as she adjusted the blanket over his chest. I stood at the foot of the bed. Useless. I'd driven 545 miles to get here, and now that I was here, I had nothing to offer. No medical expertise like Rebecca, no 52 years of intimate knowledge like my mother. Just questions that had come too late, and words I should have said decades ago. The nurse came in to check vitals. "Are you family? Son and granddaughter?" I said. "He's stable for now, but he's not out of danger. The next few hours are critical. If there's anyone who needs to be called, there's someone coming," my mother said. "Someone who needs to see him." Marcus Red Cloud arrived at 7:15. I met him in the hospital lobby, recognizing him immediately from the photograph on the website. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with silver braids that hung past his shoulders. He wore a denim shirt, dark jeans, and a turquoise bolo tie. His face was weathered, lined deeply around the eyes and mouth, but his gaze was sharp and clear. "Daniel Carter," I said, extending my hand. He took it in a firm grip. "Marcus Red Cloud." He carried a worn leather satchel over one shoulder. "How is he?" "Critical. He made it through surgery, but there were complications. He's unconscious." Marcus nodded slowly. Can I see him? I led him through the hospital corridors. In the elevator, he spoke. My father died when I was 2 years old. I don't remember him. Everything I know from his letters and his journal. He touched the satchel. He wrote every single day, even in combat, especially in combat. He said writing kept him human. The elevator doors opened. In his last entry, the day before he died, he wrote about your father. He wrote, "Met a young pilot named Carter today. Good kid, scared out of his mind, but good. Showed me a picture of his girl, Sarah. Her name is. I told him he's going to marry that girl. I can tell." We reached the ICU through the glass. I could see my mother still sitting beside the bed, Rebecca standing behind her with one hand on her shoulder. "He was right," I said. "They've been married 52 years. Marcus's expression softened. "Then my father's last act meant something. That's all any warrior can ask for." We entered the room. My mother looked up, and I saw recognition flash across her face, not of Marcus, but of something in him that echoed his father. "Mrs. Carter," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus Red Cloud, Tommy Red Cloud's son." My mother stood for a moment. They just looked at each other. Then she crossed the small room and embraced him. "Your father saved my husband's life," she said. "He gave me 52 years I wouldn't have had. Thank you." Marcus's composure cracked. "Ma'am, you don't need to thank me. My father made his choice. He was at peace with it. How do you know?" Marcus opened the satchel and pulled out a weathered composition notebook. Its cover water-stained and worn. "Because he wrote it down, the morning of March 15th, 1970. Let me read it to you." Marcus opened the journal carefully, as though the pages might disintegrate at his touch. The handwriting inside was small and precise, cramped by the narrow lines of the composition book. He found the page he wanted and began to read aloud. "March 15th, 1970, 0600 hours. Heavy fog this morning. Can't see 20 feet. Carter and I pulled radio watch together. He's nervous about today's patrol. Keeps checking his sidearm, checking the chopper, checking everything twice. I told him that's good. The ones who get careless are the ones who don't come home." Marcus paused, turned a page. "He showed me Sarah's picture again. 3rd time this week. He's got it bad for this girl. Asked me if I thought she'd wait for him. I said, 'Brother, that girl's already yours. I can see it in her eyes in that photo.' He asked me if I had someone waiting. I told him about my boy, Marcus, 2 years old. Won't remember me if I don't make it back. That scared me more than the war." My mother made a soft sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Rebecca moved closer, put her arm around her. Marcus continued reading, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Carter asked me what I'd tell my son if I could say one thing. I said I'd tell him his dad wasn't afraid. That's the truth. I'm not afraid. Not of dying. I'm afraid of dying for nothing. But if I die getting good men home, that's something. That's meaning." He turned another page. His hands shook slightly. 1400 hours. We took heavy fire. Choppers going down. Carter's hit bad. I counted the wounds, at least 20 pieces of shrapnel in his back and shoulders. He's bleeding hard, but he's conscious. He keeps saying, "Get me up, get me up." I can fly us out. Kid's in shock. Doesn't know half his back is torn open. The ventilator hissed. The monitors beeped. My father lay motionless, unaware that the story he'd carried for 54 years was finally being told. Rescue bird came in fast. Hot LZ, taking fire from 3 sides. Pilot said he's got room for 4 wounded plus his crew. We've got 5 wounded. Co-pilot's already dead. 4 of us left. Math doesn't work. Marcus's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, continued. Carter tried to pull rank. Told me to get on that bird. I told him to go to hell. I'm the oldest here by 3 years. I'm the one who makes the call. Gunners are critical, they go first. Door gunner's got a sucking chest wound, he goes second. Carter's gut shot and shredded, but he's stable enough to survive the flight, he goes third. Rebecca was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I felt my own eyes burning. I told Carter, you've got Sarah waiting. You've got a whole life lined up. I've got a boy who won't remember me and a wife who's already preparing for bad news. This is my choice, not yours. A man should go home to the woman he loves. Make sure you do that, Carter. Make sure you marry that girl. Marcus stopped reading. He looked up at my mother. That's the last entry in Daylight. There's one more. Written after dark. By moonlight. The handwriting's shaky. He found the page. 2200 hours. Heard the NVA patrol coming through the brush. I'm alone with the radio. They'll find me soon. I want my son to know I wasn't afraid. I chose this. Tell Carter I chose this. A warrior doesn't measure life in years. He measures it in meaning. I gave 4 good men a chance to go home. That's enough meaning for any lifetime. If Sarah's as good as she looks in that picture, Carter's going to have a beautiful life. I bought him that life. That makes me rich. Tell Marcus his dad died rich. Tommy Red Cloud, Sergeant, United States Army. It was an honor. The room was silent except for the machines keeping my father alive. Marcus closed the journal gently, reverently, as though sealing a tomb. They found him the next morning, Marcus said quietly. The NVA had executed him. Single bullet to the back of the head. Quick! He didn't suffer. He looked at my father's unconscious form. For 50 years, we didn't know what happened to the men he saved. We knew he died helping Americans escape, but we never knew if they made it. If his sacrifice meant anything. My mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It meant everything. He gave me a husband. He gave Daniel a father. He gave Rebecca a grandfather. 4 generations of life. All because your father stayed behind. Then his spirit can rest, Marcus said. In Navajo tradition, when a warrior gives his life for others, his spirit walks with them until the debt is acknowledged. My father has walked with yours for 54 years. It's time to release him. Rebecca spoke for the first time since Marcus began reading. Her voice was hoarse. Grandpa couldn't forgive himself. He thought he stole a life. He didn't steal anything, Marcus said firmly. My father gave freely. That's the difference between theft and sacrifice. One takes, one offers. Your grandfather needs to understand that he's unconscious, I said. He can't hear us. Are you sure? Marcus moved to the bedside, opposite my mother. He placed his hand over my father's heart, above the thin hospital gown, above the bandages that covered the surgical incisions. Mr. Carter, James, brother, I am Marcus Red Cloud, son of Tommy Red Cloud. I came to tell you, there is no debt. My father chose to stay. He chose to give you life. You honored that gift by living well, by loving Sarah, by raising your son. You carried my father's memory with honor. Now it's time to let him go. It's time to forgive yourself. Nothing changed. The monitors kept their steady rhythm. The ventilator kept breathing for him. My father's face remained slack, absent. But my mother squeezed his hand. Jim, can you hear us? Marcus is here. Tommy's son is here. He says you're forgiven. Do you understand? You're forgiven? Still nothing. Hours passed. Marcus refused to leave. He sat in the corner of the ICU room, sometimes reading from his father's journal, sometimes chanting softly in Navajo, sometimes just sitting in silence. My mother never left my father's side. Rebecca monitored every beep, every number, making minute adjustments that the nurses allowed because she was family and a doctor, and because they understood she needed to do something. I called my ex-wife, told her what was happening. She said she'd tell our son, asked if I needed her to come. I said no, but thanked her for asking. That was the most civil we'd been in 3 years. At 11 p.m., a different doctor came in, older, gray-haired, with the kind face of someone who'd delivered bad news too many times. I need to prepare you, he said gently. Your father's vitals are declining, blood pressure dropping, heart rate irregular. The damage to the pericardium was extensive. We've done everything we can, but his body is shutting down. Rebecca stood abruptly. No, we can do more. We can... Dr. Carter, the doctor said, and his voice was kind but firm. There is nothing more. I'm sorry. It's time to say goodbye. The world tilted sideways. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after we'd finally learned the truth. Not after Marcus had come all this way. My mother stood. She leaned over my father, kissed his forehead, and whispered something none of us could hear. Then she stepped back. Rebecca, she said, you need to tell him. Tell him what? Why you became a doctor. Why you chose trauma surgery. Why you work at the VA. He needs to know it was because of him, not despite him. Rebecca's face crumpled. She moved to the bedside, took her grandfather's hand in both of hers. Grandpa, she said, her voice breaking. I became a doctor because of you, because I wanted to understand you, because I wanted to save other men like you. Men who came home but never really left the war behind. I wasn't trying to exploit your pain. I was trying to honor it. I'm sorry I made you think otherwise. I'm so sorry. The monitor alarm went off. A long, steady tone, flat line. Nurses rushed in. The code team appeared within seconds, moving with choreographed urgency. Someone pushed us back, away from the bed, as they surrounded my father with equipment and efficiency. Starting compressions, a nurse announced, climbing onto the bed, placing her hands on my father's chest and pushing down hard, rhythmically. His body jerked with each compression. Charge to 200, someone said. The defibrillator whined as it powered up. They placed the paddles on his chest. Clear! My father's body arched off the bed. The monitor showed chaos. Then flatlined again. Resume compressions. Charge to 300. Rebecca tried to move forward. I caught her arm. Let them work. He's my grandfather. And you're too close. You know that. She knew. But knowing didn't make watching any easier. They shocked him again. And again. 5 times. 6. My mother stood perfectly still. Hands clasped in front of her, lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been memory. Marcus continued his Navajo chant, low and steady, a counterpoint to the controlled chaos. How long, someone asked. 12 minutes. 12 minutes of death. 12 minutes of a heart that wouldn't beat, lungs that wouldn't breathe. 12 minutes of a brain slowly dying from lack of oxygen. The doctor who'd warned us earlier stood with his hand on the shoulder of the nurse doing compressions. I saw him preparing to call it. Saw him open his mouth to say the words that would make it official. Rebecca broke free from my grip and pushed through the code team. "One more time," she said. "Please. One more shock. Dr. Carter. We've been at this for... I know how long, I know the protocols, I know the odds. I'm asking for one more." The doctor looked at her, then at my father, then nodded. "Charge to 360. One more time." The defibrillator whined again, higher pitched this time, pushed to its maximum. They placed the paddles. Clear. The shock threw my father's body upward. Everyone watched the monitor. Nothing. Flatline. The tone stretched out like a scream. Then a blip. Small, irregular. Then another. Then a rhythm. Weak. But there. "We have sinus rhythm," someone said. And the relief in her voice was palpable. Pulse. A nurse checked. Thready, but present. BP 70/40. Get him on pressors. Type and cross for transfusion. Get me a cardiothoracic consult now. The chaos reorganized into controlled urgency. They adjusted IV lines, added new medications, worked with the kind of focus that comes from pulling someone back from the edge. Slowly, gradually. The numbers on the monitors improved. 75/45, 80/50, heart rate steadying, oxygen saturation climbing. The doctor turned to us, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not quite belief, but close to it. He's back. I don't know how, but he's back. The next few hours will tell us if there's brain damage from the oxygen deprivation. But for now, he's alive. Rebecca sank into a chair, her whole body shaking. My mother crossed to my father's bedside as the code team cleared out, leaving only the ICU nurses to manage the aftermath. She took his hand again, held it to her cheek. "Stubborn old man," she whispered. "I told you. You don't get to leave yet." Marcus stood, moved closer. In Navajo belief, when someone walks to the edge of death and returns, they bring back wisdom from the other side. Your husband has walked that edge. Perhaps he found what he needed there. Hours passed. 3 in the morning became 4, then 5. The hospital seemed to breathe differently in these hours, quieter, more honest. The machinery of saving lives stripped down to its essential rhythm. At 6:15 a.m., just as weak daylight began filtering through the ICU windows, my father's eyes opened, not the blank stare of unconsciousness, but actual awareness. His eyes moved, found my mother's face, focused. She leaned close. "Jim, can you hear me?" His lips moved. No sound came out at first, just breath. Then so quietly we had to strain to hear, "Sarah, I'm here. I'm right here." His gaze shifted, found me standing at the foot of the bed, then Rebecca, then Marcus, and there his eyes stopped, confused. "There's someone here to see you," my mother said gently. "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Marcus stepped forward into my father's line of sight. "Mr. Carter, James, I'm Marcus Redcloud, Tommy's son." My father's eyes widened. His mouth opened, closed. He tried to speak but couldn't manage more than a whisper. Marcus leaned closer. "What happened to Tommy?" "I'm sorry. I couldn't." "Stop," Marcus said firmly but kindly. "My father wrote about that day. He wrote about you. I know what happened, and I need you to understand there was no failure. There was only his choice. He chose to stay. He chose to give you life. You didn't steal anything from him. He gave freely." Tears leaked from the corners of my father's eyes, running down into his hair. I watched from the helicopter. I watched them. I know. My father knew you watched. He wrote that he hoped you'd remember him, that you'd live the life he was giving you, that you'd marry Sarah and be happy. Marcus pulled out the journal, opened it to the last page. He wrote, "Tell Carter I chose this. A warrior doesn't measure life in years. He measures it in meaning. I gave 4 good men a chance to go home. That's enough meaning for any lifetime." My father's whole body shook with sobs, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it's been sealed off for decades. My mother held him, careful of the tubes and wires, and let him break apart. Rebecca moved to the other side of the bed, took his hand. "Grandpa, you saved his sacrifice from being meaningless. You lived. You loved Mom." Her voice caught. "You loved Grandma. You raised Dad. You made Tommy's choice worth it, don't you see? By living well, you honored him." My father looked at her, really looked at her, and through his tears he managed to speak more clearly. "Becca, I was wrong about the interview. You weren't using my pain. You were trying to understand it." "We were both wrong," Rebecca said. "I pushed too hard. I made it about research instead of about you. I'm sorry." "I'm proud of you," my father whispered. "Doctor, saving people. That's good. That's real good." It was the most words I'd heard him string together in years, the most emotion I'd ever seen him show. 54 years of silence, breaking like a dam. He turned his head slightly. "Found me. Daniel. I was a bad father, wasn't I? The question hit me like a fist. No. You were there. You were always there. But not really there. I was somewhere else. You were carrying something too heavy to share. I understand that now. I should have told you about Tommy, about all of it. You're telling us now. That's what matters. My father's eyes moved back to Marcus. Your father? He had a family, waiting. And he made his choice as a warrior and a man, Marcus said. In our tradition, that kind of sacrifice creates a bond that transcends death. You and my father are brothers across time. You've carried him honorably. But it's time to let him rest. It's time to forgive yourself. I don't know how. Marcus reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. He unwrapped it carefully. 2 military dog tags on a beaded chain. He held them up so my father could see. These were my father's. The army sent them home with his personal effects. I've carried them for 50 years, waiting to find you. They belong with you now. You're his brother. You carry his memory. Take them. He placed the dog tags in my father's hand, closed his fingers around them. My father clutched them to his chest and cried harder, but it was different now, not the crying of guilt and shame, but of release, of finally, after 54 years, being forgiven for a sin he'd never committed. The sun rose fully, filling the ICU with morning light. The machines beeped their steady reassurance. My father held Tommy Red Cloud's dog tags in one hand and my mother's hand in the other, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father at peace. My father came home 3 weeks later. The doctors called it miraculous. The cardiac damage had healed better than expected. The stroke had left minimal deficit, some weakness in his right hand, occasional difficulty finding words. But his mind was sharp, and his spirit, for the first time in my memory, was present. We brought him back to the ranch house on an October afternoon when the cottonwoods were turning gold and the air smelled of approaching winter. Marcus had stayed in Billings, taking a room at the Sleep Inn, visiting the hospital daily. And he was there when we pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always had, modest, weathered, functional. But walking through that door with my father leaning on my arm, everything felt different. The silence that had filled these rooms for 50 years had been broken, and what rushed in to replace it was something I didn't have words for yet. Sarah had prepared the house. Railings installed, the furniture rearranged to make pathways wider, a walker waiting by the door. My father looked at it all and shook his head. "I'm sleeping in my own bed," he said, "with my wife, like I have for 52 years. Rebecca started to protest with her doctor voice, but Sarah touched her arm. "Let him," she said quietly. "He's earned normal." That first night, we sat around the kitchen table, 5 of us, where there used to be 3. Sarah made cornbread and beef stew. My father ate slowly, his right hand still clumsy with the spoon, but he ate. And more importantly, he talked. Not about the war at first, about small things, the cottonwood that needed trimming, the fence post that had rotted through last spring, whether the Broncos had any chance this season. Normal conversation, the kind we'd never really had before because there had always been too much unsaid crowding out the ordinary. After dinner, Marcus pulled out his father's journal again. "There's more I didn't read at the hospital," he said. "Earlier entries, about before the war, about what my father hoped for." He opened to a page near the beginning. "January 1970, shipped out today. Told my wife I'd be home for Marcus's 3rd birthday. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. She was already preparing to be a widow. I don't blame her. But I'm coming home. I have to. Marcus needs a father." My father listened, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Tommy's dog tags now hanging around his neck outside his shirt where everyone could see them. Marcus continued. "February 1970. Met some good men. There's a quiet kid from Montana. Carter. Barely old enough to shave. He flies like he's got something to prove. I told him to stop trying to be a hero. Heroes get killed. Smart soldiers come home." A small smile crossed my father's face. "I remember that. I thought he was talking down to me. Took me 20 years to understand he was trying to keep me alive." March 1970. Carter showed me a picture of his girl, Sarah. Pretty thing with kind eyes. I told him marry her the day you get home. Don't wait. Life's too short for waiting. He said he would. I believe him. Sarah reached across the table and took my father's hand. 52 years of marriage in that gesture. Marcus closed the journal. "My father had wisdom he didn't live long enough to use, but he passed it to you. You've lived by it. You married Sarah immediately. You didn't waste time." "I was terrified," my father admitted. "The whole ceremony, I kept thinking, Tommy should be here. Tommy should be the one getting married. I almost didn't go through with it." "Why did you?" I asked. "Because Sarah told me the night before. She said, if you spend your whole life guilty about surviving, then Tommy died for nothing. Honor him by living." So I tried. But I never stopped feeling like I was living a borrowed life. "It wasn't borrowed," Marcus said firmly. "It was given." There's a difference. My father chose to give. You chose to receive it and live it well. That's not theft. That's grace. The word hung in the air. Grace. I'd never heard my father speak in those terms. He'd never been religious, never philosophical. But now he nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something that had eluded him for 5 decades. Rebecca had been quiet through dinner, but now she spoke. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something about my work, about why I really became a trauma surgeon." He looked at her, waiting. "When I was 12, I found one of Grandma's medical journals, the ones where she documented your scars. I didn't understand what I was reading at first. I thought you had some disease. But then I found the entry where she wrote about Vietnam, about the shrapnel, about how you woke up screaming 3 times a week but refused to talk about it." She paused, gathering herself. "I realized then that you were suffering, and nobody could help you because you wouldn't let them. So I decided I'd become a doctor who specialized in helping people who couldn't ask for help, veterans with invisible wounds, men and women who came home but never really left the war. My father's eyes filled. Becca, I wasn't trying to exploit your pain for my career. I was trying to fix you the only way I knew how, by learning to fix others like you. But I went about it all wrong. I pushed when I should have waited. I demanded answers when I should have offered presents. No, my father said, and his voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. You were right. I needed to talk. I just wasn't ready. But you planted the seed. You made me think about whether my silence was protecting anyone or just hurting everyone. They looked at each other across the table, and something passed between them that needed no words. Forgiveness, maybe, or just understanding. Later that evening, Marcus and my father sat on the porch while the rest of us cleaned up inside. Through the window, I watched them. Two men who should have been strangers, bound together by a death that happened before one of them was old enough to remember. I stepped outside, stood in the doorway. He's writing another letter, Marcus said, nodding toward my father. To my mother. She's still alive, 83 years old, living in Shiprock with my sister. He wants to tell her what her husband's last words were, what he was thinking. She's waited 54 years to know. My father's hand moved slowly across the paper, the pen awkward in his weakened grip, but determined. Dear Mrs. Red Cloud, I read over his shoulder, your husband Tommy saved my life on March 15, 1970. I have spent 54 years trying to find the courage to tell you that I watched him die. I watched him choose to stay behind so I could go home. He spoke of you and your son in his last hours. He wanted you to know he wasn't afraid, that he was at peace with his choice, that he loved you both more than his own life. He paused, looked up at me. Is that too much? Am I saying too much? Keep going, I said quietly. He continued writing. I came home to Sarah. We married in 1971. We've been together 52 years. We had a son, Daniel, a granddaughter, Rebecca. She's a doctor now, helping other veterans like your husband helped me. I've lived a good life. Not perfect, but good. I've tried to make your husband's sacrifice mean something. I hope I've succeeded. I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to tell you this. I hope you can forgive me for surviving when he didn't. Marcus watched him write, and when my father finished, Marcus added his own note at the bottom. Mom, this is the man Dad wrote about. The pilot with the pretty girlfriend. Dad was right about him. He married her. He lived well. He honored Dad's memory by not wasting the gift he was given. Be proud of Dad. I am. Marcus. We mailed the letter the next morning. All 5 of us drove to the post office in town, and my father placed it in the slot himself, his hand steady. 3 days later, the phone rang. My father stood by the phone, hand trembling as he lifted the receiver. It was a woman's voice, soft and weathered by time, speaking with the careful English of someone who'd learned the language later in life but spoke it with dignity. Mr. Carter, this is Helen Red Cloud, Tommy's wife. My father's knees buckled. Marcus caught him, guided him to a chair. Sarah picked up the extension in the kitchen so she could hear too. Mrs. Red Cloud, my father managed. I'm so sorry. I should have written years ago. I should have... Stop. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. Marcus read me your letter 3 times. I've been waiting 54 years to hear those words, not because I blamed you, because I needed to know my husband's last moments had meaning, that he didn't die alone and afraid. He wasn't afraid, my father said, tears streaming down his face. He was calm. He was sure. He told me to go home to Sarah. He told me to marry her and be happy. Those were his last words to me. Helen Red Cloud was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Then he died the way he lived, making sure others got home safe. That was always Tommy. Even as a boy, he'd give away his lunch if someone was hungry. He'd walk a stray dog 5 miles home. He couldn't stand the thought of anyone being lost or alone. He saved 4 men that day, my father said. 4 of us lived because of him. And did you live well? Did you waste the gift he gave you? My father looked at Sarah, who stood in the kitchen doorway with tears running down her face. He looked at me, at Rebecca, at Marcus. I married Sarah 3 months after I got home. We've been together 52 years. We had a son, a granddaughter. I worked hard. I tried to be good. I didn't always succeed, but I tried. Then my husband's death had meaning. Helen said simply, "That's all I ever wanted to know, that he didn't die for nothing. Mrs. Red Cloud, I want to come see you, to meet you properly, to tell you everything about that day, everything your husband said, everything he did. You deserve to know. We would like that very much," Helen said. "When can you come?" And that's how, 6 weeks after his stroke, my father made the journey he'd been too afraid to make for 54 years. We drove in a rented RV because the doctor said my father wasn't cleared to fly yet. Montana to New Mexico, 1,100 miles of highway. 3 days of driving through states I'd only seen from airplane windows. Sarah sat beside my father in the back, playing cards and reading aloud from the newspaper. Rebecca drove the first leg. Then I took over. Then Rebecca again. Marcus had flown back to prepare his family for our arrival. My father was quiet for much of the drive, looking out the window at the landscape rolling past. But it wasn't the distant, absent quiet I'd known my whole life. It was contemplative, peaceful, almost. On the second night, stopped at a rest area in Colorado, he asked me to take a walk with him. We moved slowly, his cane clicking on the pavement, his breath visible in the cold November air. "I've been a terrible father to you," he said without preamble. "Dad, let me finish. I was physically present, but emotionally absent your entire childhood. I never asked about your dreams, never told you I was proud of you, never said I loved you out loud. You showed it in other ways. That's not enough," he interrupted. "A boy needs to hear the words. A man needs to know his father sees him." He stopped walking, turned to face me. "Daniel, I see you. I've always seen you. I was just too locked in my own guilt to tell you. You're a good man. You're kind. You're steady. You're everything I hoped you'd be. And I'm proud of you. I should have said that 40 years ago." Something in my chest cracked open. I'd spent my whole life waiting to hear those words, and now that they came, I didn't know what to do with them except cry. He pulled me into an awkward hug, the first real embrace we'd shared since I was a child. His arms were thin now, weakened by surgery and age, but they held me firmly. "I'm sorry I waited so long," he said. "I'm sorry for all the years I let silence stand between us." "You're here now," I managed. "That's what matters." We stood there in a rest stop in Colorado, two grown men crying in the parking lot. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a father who was fully present. On the third day, we crossed into New Mexico. The landscape changed red rock and sage, vast sky, a quality of light that seemed both harsh and holy. We followed Highway 491 north toward Shiprock, and as we got closer, my father grew more nervous. "What if she hates me?" he asked Sarah. "She won't," Sarah said calmly. "She's had 54 years to hate you if she was going to. She called you, remember? She wants to meet you." "What if I can't find the right words?" "Then don't use words, just be present. That's all anyone wants." We arrived in Shiprock at 3 in the afternoon. The town was small, surrounded by desert, dominated by the massive volcanic rock formation that gave it its name. Marcus met us at the community center, a low building with a blue metal roof and murals painted on the exterior walls. "My mother is inside," he said. "The whole family is here. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They all wanted to meet you. Is that okay?" My father nodded, though I could see his hands shaking. We walked in together, my father leaning on his cane, Sarah on one side, me on the other. Rebecca and Marcus followed. The community center was filled with people. 50, maybe 60, 3 generations of red clouds. They fell silent when we entered. Every eye on my father. An elderly woman sat in a chair at the center of the room. She was small, her face deeply lined, her hair white and pulled back in a traditional bun, but her eyes were sharp and clear. And when she saw my father, she smiled. "James Carter," she said. Her voice was stronger than it had been on the phone. "Come here. Let me see the man my husband died for." My father crossed the room slowly. When he reached her, he knelt down with difficulty, bringing himself to her eye level. "Mrs. Red Cloud," he said. "I'm so sorry." She reached out and took his face in both hands, studying him the way a mother examines a child. "You look like your photograph. Older, but the same kind eyes. Tommy said you had kind eyes. He said men with kind eyes don't survive war easily because they feel too much. Was he right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Then his death wasn't wasted. The ones who feel nothing don't need saving. You needed saving, and my Tommy saved you. That's as it should be." She pulled his head down and kissed his forehead. "Welcome home, brother. You're family now. Tommy made you family when he gave you his life. We don't forget our family." And just like that, my father was welcomed into a family he'd never met, embraced by people whose loved one had died so he could live. There was no blame, no resentment, just acceptance and grace. They fed us traditional Navajo food, mutton stew, fry bread, blue corn mush. They told stories about Tommy as a boy, as a young man, as a soldier. They showed us photographs we'd never seen. Tommy as a teenager, holding his first rifle. Tommy on his wedding day, looking impossibly young. Tommy holding infant Marcus. Pride and fear mixed in his expression. My father listened to every story, asked questions, remembered details. He told them about that last day, about the helicopter, about Tommy's calmness. He told them things he'd never told anyone, And they received his words like precious gifts. As the evening wore on, an elder stood up, a man in his 80s with a face like carved wood and eyes that had seen everything. "In our tradition," he said, "when a warrior gives his life for another, they become brothers in spirit. James Carter and Tommy Red Cloud are brothers across time. Tonight, we honor both. Tommy, for his sacrifice. James, for carrying our brother's memory with dignity." He pulled out a Navajo blanket, its pattern intricate in blue and white. "This is for you, James Carter. So you remember that you're not alone. You're part of this family now. You're part of us." They wrapped the blanket around my father's shoulders. Helen Red Cloud stood slowly, with Marcus's help, and placed her hand over my father's heart. "My husband walks with you no more," she said. "His spirit is released. His debt is paid. Walk in beauty, brother."